Hi everyone and welcome to Blue Hornet's live webinar, Implementing Responsive Design, a Tactical Guide. My name is Ashley Deese. I'm the Marketing Manager at Blue Hornet. And today I am joined by Blue Hornet client, Take Part. Daniel Park, the Director of CRM Marketing, is here with us. And we also have John Bilderback, our Senior Creative Designer for Blue Hornet. So today we're going to be talking about responsive design. And we're so happy to have Take Part here, because they'll talk about who Take Part is, who their subscribers are, and their recent website email program redesign. We'll give a little bit of a high-level background, and then we'll turn it over to John to go over some of the nitty-gritty details about the adaptive design, how he evaluated the mock-ups, how he turned it into adaptive design, and the notes, comments, testing, and support that we provided for Take Part. Then we'll go over the high-level results. We'll turn it back to Daniel for that piece. And then we'll have a Q&A. And I realize sometimes responsive design questions can be a little lengthy and may require more than a simple Q&A. So if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to reach out to you and make sure your question is answered. A few housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending it out to everybody early next week. And to ask any question, just type it into your Q&A box on your console, and we'll be sure to get to you. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Daniel Park from Take Part.
Thanks, Ashley. Hey, everyone. My name is Daniel, and so I work for a company called TakePart.com, and we are a subsidiary of Participant Media. And what Participant is a film company. You know, we focus on a lot of social issue movies, including The Help, Lincoln, Food Inc., The Cove, Inconvenient Truth, to name a few. So that's where you probably know us from. And you know, Take Part is like the digital arm of Participant, and what we do is we're a content site focused on social causes and topics including food, wildlife, environment, social justice, among others. And our goal is that we tie together stories with an action. And when I say action, that includes getting people to sign a petition, taking a pledge, making a donation, things like that. And so it's not only are you reading the story, but then we have this embeddable widget in our stories that it's going to drive you to do something. So our goal is that we're making you take an action, and then that's going to actually create a real life difference in the world. So it's a very cool company. And if you haven't seen the website, definitely check it out. And then from like an email perspective, you know, we send out about 5 weekly newsletters right now that are focused based on various topics like food, environment, wildlife. And then we also have a daily digest email that we send out Monday through Friday. And like most companies, email is like a very vital part of our marketing program and definitely very successful for us. You know, we've seen that our email users are about 30 times more likely to take an action on our site. You know, they spend about 20% more time on the site, and then you know, they see about 36% more pages per visit. So when we started out last year thinking, okay, well, it's time for a redesign of the website, which you'll see today. And as part of that redesign, it made sense that we were going to do a redesign of the email templates. And you know, when that came up, we're thinking, okay, well, this is a great opportunity for us to bring in responsive design into that, because we knew the website was going to be responsive, so it definitely made sense that we wanted to make sure our emails could do the same. And you know, one of the main reasons we wanted to go that way is it's not for the sake of going responsive because it's cool, but it was an important statement that we're making on behalf of our brand. And so when you think about it, these emails, along with any of your marketing, it does make a big difference on how people view you and your brand as a whole. And so some of the things that we thought about is like, you know, when we have these open rates in mobile peaking over 45% now, and we got to make sure these things are looking good on mobile. And you know, one of the driving factors when we think about it is, you know, again, it's about what the people think about the brand. You know, to quote Sims Jenkins, and he wrote this book called The New Inbox. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely it's worth a read. And he states that, you know, like if a mobile email doesn't look good, you know, about 70% of people will delete it, 18% people will unsub from it, and then 75% people say it has negative impact on how you look at the brand. which is a big statement to think about. So as you guys are thinking about that for your own brands, and keep that in mind, it's not only just about how it looks, but it does make an impact on what people think about your site in general. And then, so during this period of time, we were like, what we needed to do was obviously create a new design. And what we did, we worked really closely with our design team and Blue Hornet to figure out what these responsive templates are going to be like. So we started finding a few examples of mobile-friendly emails that we liked. A couple of inspirations that we had were from TED and Fast Company. And on the screen right now, you see that we have a wireframe from our food newsletter. This was one of many templates that we did, and John will talk more in depth about our daily template. So we spent time analyzing what made sense on desktop and what made sense on mobile. We also had to make a few decisions on like what elements should stay within our brand's style guide, and then which elements we thought we needed to change for the email. For example, this includes like the text links versus button links for our read more buttons. And you'll see that in the daily template. It's on our website. There aren't really any button links. It's all text links. So, but it made sense when we go mobile that we need to make sure it's very clear call to action that a user would be able to click on a large button with their thumb. After a lot of back and forth, with design, and with Blue Hornet's help, we figured out what made sense from a technical standpoint, because our early designs didn't necessarily translate into something that could be coded. So that was really helpful from their standpoint to figure out what that made sense. And then once that was good, then we handed it off to Blue Hornet for coding. And then we finally launched our new portfolio of responsive templates in early November, which coincided with the site launch, and it's been successful ever since. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to John to talk about the process in a little more detail.
Thank you, Daniel. This is John Bilderback, Senior Designer here at Blue Hornet. Thank you again. Welcome to the webinar on implementing responsive design. It's a little technical, it's a little design, some theory, and a lot of hard work and practice. So some of my key responsibilities here at Blue Hornet are building email templates and campaigns for our clients, much like Take Part. And in that body of work, you can imagine that we're kind of neck deep in responsive design practices and opportunities or issues, whichever way you want to think of them. In this presentation, we'll use the Take Part as their design as a springboard for the discussion around how to build a responsive campaign and some of the nuances of providing great support for both desktop and small screen being a mobile device, whether that be a tablet or the small mobile handheld. And a few housekeeping items that I'd like to throw out there is that there are a couple terms in the industry, responsive design versus adaptive design. I'm going to use them semi-interchangeably through the discussion. I don't know that that's for the purist out there, that's not necessarily 100% correct, but this is a responsive seminar, and the design is adaptive to the mobile screen and to the desktop, so we'll go with that as our foundation. And the last comment I would make as we dive in here is that I would look at this with the eye of how my design fits into this picture. So with that, if you're ready to go, let's dive in. So the benefits in this evaluation, I started to study the Take Part design and said, okay, so what would I want all the participants today to walk away with? And so the first one would be an understanding of the possibilities. Just know that it's not quite nuts and bolts, but in this presentation, I want you to catch a big glimpse that there's a lot of opportunities, there's a lot of neat things that you can do, and some of them require some technical resources and some thoughtfulness, both on the design side and on the coding side of how to make them work and come up with a design solution perhaps to a technically imperfect world. The second idea, is that design is more than just a reference point. It's integral to the success of an email campaign. And we're designing around HTML, which we coded like it was 1999, and we're trying to adapt that into a much more current venue being your mobile device. And the last thought would be is that one email template, it certainly can yield us great results, but the ... here is that perhaps it's not enough, that we need to think about having multiple email templates or a couple of templates that facilitate a delivery of a message or a key point that don't function the same every single time. So here's the creative that was delivered to us from TakePart, and on the screen we have the mobile version on the left and the desktop version in an Outlook-friendly window on the right. And I'm only showing the first little bit of the creative, but we're going to focus right here today and just kind of absorb this for a minute. The responsive side, the small screen version, you can actually see how the button is moved underneath and on the desktop where its position is. Here I'm looking at a hierarchy in the message, and I'm thinking about what are the most important elements here that are going to be read or clicked. What are their position? What do their surrounding elements look like? What's the design around these guys? What's the flavor, if you will? And then I'm going to look at the type size, type color. I'm going to look at text versus images. Is this a button? Is this an image? Is this button an image? Is it an HTML text button? Semi-technical, complicated part there. But if it's HTML text, we would treat it one way, and if it's just a straight image button, we would treat it another way in the HTML. And then also I'll look at this from the evaluation standpoint of what draws the visual attention, where's my eye going, is this button lost under the image where it's clear over in the desktop version, how do we impact that, and ultimately what message could I take back to the client and say, hey, you know, maybe if we sharpen this up, it would make a better presentation. Last part here is that we're going to look at the images. Are they scaled up or down? Are they different sizes in the mobile version? Are they even different images in the mobile version versus the desktop? So by doing some HTML magic, we can actually display a different image in the mobile version as opposed to the desktop version. I'm going to look at spacing. Again, white space or negative space helps our eyes both relax and actually guides us to where the clicks are, to where the key points of interest are, separating content. So I've outlined a couple of key points that I was keen on looking at. I digest this in kind of a table row format. I don't look at everything in life that way, but email specifically, I'm looking at it from a, if this were a row, how would this work, and is it repeatable, and can I make this work, and what's the white space around this row? Again, the organization here, talking about that table row structure, is there anything special that needs to go on around this? Do I need to scale it differently? Does it need to pinch differently when it goes down to the mobile? What's the position going to be? And then I'm going to look at some best practices points and start considering, okay, text on desktop versus mobile, call to action size, where is it placed, the organization, and then CSS treatments. We know that CSS needs to be written inline on the desktop, and on our mobile devices, it actually through an app media query, which technically we're not going to touch on, but I'll show it in the code a little bit later on. It overrides the inline styles with the CSS that's in the head of the document and actually can display something different. And that's really where the nuts and bolts magic happens, is by rewriting the inline CSS with this CSS that's in the head. We get this neat magic technically that can transform our screen into a different viewpoint. So with that, we're going to dive into the desktop version, and I'm going to go through some of my thought processes and display some code and give you some nuts and bolts here. So again, the desktop version, I'm looking at the table-based layout. How are they rows? How is it flexible? What's the minimum risk in the mobile version? Is this a row that I can repeat, and how many times can I repeat this? The subtext to that would be if this were dynamic content or another content feed, how can I pipe in content and have it repeat and show up and fill the template, supporting good content and less work on the email marketing manager side. Now we're going to look at the mobile versus mobile desktop head. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. The masthead versus the desktop and the mobile version. And I've highlighted both the desktop version and the mobile version, and you can see some differences. They're there in the green square, where Take Part Daily, we have the tagline that's underneath Take Part Daily, and we have the social media, Follow Us, that's sitting off to the right-hand side. And in the mobile version, it pinches down, refactors, and the tagline comes up near the end of the word daily, and then the social media actually floats below those. And the way that we do that is, in the desktop version, we code this relatively straightforward. There are two floating tables sitting left and right. I don't display all of that code. The snippet, the first part here, is that it's the head of the first table, and then we apply some classes to the TDs and also a class logo hero to the A tag, the H reference that makes up Take Part Daily. So that when it does refactor down to the mobile size, what happens is we hide the desktop image and we display a background image on the A tag that is the new mobile header, and it uses the same link. It just is a refactor or a different image, if you will. And you can apply that to any image application in your design. Next, we're going to talk about the call to action. Again, another semi-technical point, not quite as bell and whistle as the last one, but this one's kind of nice because technically we struggled with actually coming up with how do we reposition these elements. We noticed that the button in the desktop is in one position, and then in the mobile version it's underneath the image. They scale to match the width of the image in the mobile version, so there's a couple of refactoring movement items that are going on. And in just the nuts and bolts of making that work was that by having a TD that didn't have any association to it, it didn't have any inline styles, it was relatively a raw TD, we put a div inside that TD, and that contained the button and the social share this icons. And what that allowed us to do, well, one, divs are not necessarily a best practice. They're not used for layouts in the desktop mode, but they can be used as kind of a hidden item that we can support in the mobile version. So by applying a class to that, I can specifically target that and then target the subclasses in the TD or underneath that div and help realign them. So that's how we achieved that button move, was we kind of inserted this div and then re-pushed things around, and I'll explain this code a little bit later on. One of the other considerations that I did, and this is further down in the email template, was that image bullets. I just attended Marketing Sherpa and gave a number of seminars to some pretty fabulous clients and prospects, and just had a good time meeting with people and consulting with them on some design best practices over their templates. And some of the things that we know that we can support in the web world are not supportable, again, across all the email platforms. They're not supportable with great consistency. And image bullets seem to be one of those items that, or bullets in general, seem to be one of those items that are not necessarily a best practice, and so we need to come up with a solution to them, and that's doing things with image bullets. I like image bullets as a designer because they fit with the brand. I can move them, I can factor them, I can scale them, I can do all of these other magical things between desktop and mobile and maintain a brand look as opposed to doing the LI styled as we might be experienced in doing web design. A quick subnote there on image bullets. is that we could be doing this with special characters. So the ampersand, BUL, colon, or semicolon could work in this case. You would have to use a whole bunch of font styling tags to do that. But it is definitely an option. I prefer image bullets. I like the way they look. They look great in the brand. In both versions, we have some 1-pixel lines or 5-pixel TD separators that were visually there in the design. So how did we achieve those? And we note that there's some serious inconsistency between 1-pixel lines, even 5 pixels, whatever height we've specified. Height is a deprecated tag in the web world, but again, using table layouts, we still have the application of height in TDs. So we can specify height, but what we can't specify is its support across all these various platforms: webmail, desktop mail being Outlook, and all the variations of Outlook, whether they use IE or Word as their rendering engine, Gmail and Firefox, Gmail and Chrome. So they all have their subtle nuances on how they would support this. So with this, to make a 1-pixel line work, what we've come down to is that we need to specify the height in the TD. It could be, in this case, I've highlighted down below, to make a 5-pixel TD or a 1-pixel TD, we would use a 1-pixel height on the TD, and then we would actually add into the style of that TD line height, a font height, and an actual height, and they would all match. They would all have the 5-pixel height. In there also in the green, you'll note that I have a 1-pixel spacer image. I called it SP. Quick couple subnotes about that. Talking with one of the other creatives, he was like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Seems kind of old school, John. So tell me about that, and why do we still do that?" So it's kind of a reserving the space methodology. So by putting a 1-pixel space in there, it helps reserve that space, whether it be a 1-pixel line or a 5-pixel line or even a 20-pixel line. Could we put a non-breaking space in there? Yes, we could, but that's going to lend itself to some other complications when we're specifying font and line height. So this 1-pixel dot basically is a clear GIF that we actually just put in there, and it does help quite a bit in the Outlook family to provide a 1-pixel line. Subnote on labeling your images. This one is just called an sp.gif. As I explored doing a number of creatives, there were some creatives where I had used the add.gif or add.jpg or add underscore, whatever the name of the ad was. And I noticed that within several webmail clients, they were actually stripping out those images. And when I came to find out that it was with the suffix or prefix on there of being add or even just the name ad, it was stripping out that image because it was seeing it as an ad that was being placed in there. And perhaps that's a little old school tech or direction, but it stands to reason after a few tests that I was like, oh, I need to not use names that would indicate something other than that they were building blocks. So if I were doing an ad, I would call that, whatever the title of the ad was, and give it a date, something like that. It makes it relevant and useful, and doesn't just make it seem like it's a generic piece of content. Adaptive or responsive design, my notes are that we can hide things on the mobile version, and that tends to work really great. However, the hiding, scaling, or disguising elements on the desktop version is not necessarily consistent or doesn't work very well. So I've tried to limit. We've had lengthy discussions on hiding and showing. Tried to hide some of or limit the amount of hide and show, hide and reveal that we would do. Although hiding desktop images and displaying a background image on a TD or an A tag tends to work rather flawlessly in the mobile device. So and on the desktop as well. So that's a great way to solve that design flaw. Again, many different rendering engines. And the last call out here is that divs are not a best practice or supported as layout elements in the desktop world, but it's definitely something that we can use to help augment the mobile rendering. We're going to dive into the adaptive design, adaptive or responsive, whichever way you want to think of it right at the moment. What I tend to do, this is actually my code base. You're looking at what I would start with for any responsive campaign that I begin with, and the two notes that I call out is that I have the @media query. It's highlighted in pink. It shows that anything under a max width of 480 pixels, this triggers the on state for this CSS. So whenever the screen is under 480 pixels, the below CSS actually begins to come into effect. You'll note likewise that in the green, this is called the Yahoo body fix. Near and dear to my heart. It's the only way that we get responsive to work. In the Yahoo world, there are some other types of approaches that have worked. This is the one that I tend to go with. And I tend to relabel the ID to be personal to whatever client I might be working on. So in TakePart's case, I called this the TP or TakePart. And I repeated that name up above. So body bracket ID equals whatever the ID name would be, and then moved on to the CSS. In the mobile version, again, we're paying attention. I'm going to go all the way back to this position of the button. Since we are moving the button down below the image and actually giving it some new width, I was able to impart CSS to, hey, make this div scale, and in scaling, I need to give you some new margins. And those are the blue notations that are there. And then likewise in there, that's a absolute position div. So within that TD, again, the nondescript TD, we have this div that's beginning to reposition the lowering tables. And so it has a position of absolute, top being 0, which would be the top of the preceding table, or TD, and that the overflow is hidden. Subsequently, the call-out that I would make here is that in design we only had 2 lines of text for the headline. In a later iteration we had, 3 or 4 lines of text in some of those. We needed to overcome some of the absolute positioning, and that was done by removing a height and making it a little more flexible. So the call-out that I would say is that you live in not a static world that tends to be very fluid with the content that you're providing for your template. For the mobile version, it would go without saying that we need to overcome some of the big screen to little screen variations, and that would be font sizes. Font sizes, of course, on the mobile version, we can pinch it, we can scale it, we can zoom in into it, but we may lose part of our overall picture. So by responsively adapting to the little screen, we can also adapt our font sizes and make them readable at a glance. Minimum font sizes typically start at about 13 pixels. The iPhone's base is 13 pixels. As a conscientious designer myself, I tend to spec 14 as the minimum. I tend to like that on my iPhone. Not that I'm partial to just my designs, but I like to see the 14 pixels there and set the line height appropriately. For the pixel perfectionist in the audience, font and line height are really not very consistent between all mail apps, be they on the desktop or the mobile or web application or mobile application. And by specifying font size and line height, you'll get a much more consistent approach and look. I'd like to run through some testing supports, notes, anecdotes, thoughts on the whole process, and items that I would go through in my daily workflow. My testing practices, I was asked as I approached this slide, with another designer, well, how much time do you usually spend per campaign, per design? If it were a 2-hour project, how much time do you spend testing? Off the cuff, I threw out a quarter of the time, maybe about, a half an hour's worth of time I might spend actually testing. And my process and the tools that I use here is I'm using the Firefox Web Developer tool. It's the responsive design view. It allows me to scale the window back and forth, going between desktop and mobile view. I can use the Google Chrome responsive inspector. It's very similar. Once I've coded certain points, and my example is that with the buttons that moved in the template, I would actually, I might code font and line height rather ad hoc, and I might do those changes, just spec them, and move on to other changes. But when I was working and I would do something like the div change, then I would actually be flipping back and forth and testing. Not quite every change, but at least either every major iteration of a change, and reviewing the work that I had done plus the major work that I had done. So with that, that's where the responsive design viewing, the Google Chrome responsive inspector come in. I can't reiterate enough that you should do syn tests, and that the W3 code validator services, well, they're free. You can send them your code. You can actually use it if you're using a tool like Dreamweaver. It's actually built in. It actually will go out and validate your code and give you a response. All we're looking for, again, coupled with your HTML doc type, we're not going with the HTML5 doc type. We're typically using HTML401 strict, or perhaps even the loose standards. I'm just looking for validation that I didn't fat finger or not close one of my TDs or leave a bracket open, something like that. So it's definitely worth its time in doing a review with the validation service. We also use tools like Email and Acid and Litmus. Both of them are stellar tools, providing a wealth of information as well as a set of resources to go to and say, wow, I'm having this issue. Are other people having this issue? How did they solve it? What nuances around that might be there? And then the last item in nice big blue is we got to test on real-world devices. It's taken a long time to develop that as a best practice, but you definitely, if your results are expected at a certain level and you're looking at, 43% of my audience is on iOS devices, industry stats right now are 50% and greater. We've seen campaigns where by going responsive, the responses jumped up to 70 and 80% per campaign on the mobile open rate by doing a responsive design. I just can't reiterate enough, test on real world devices. Try and get if you've got a friend with an Android or a coworker with an Android, have them look at it, send them a mail test, use your iOS device, whatever it might be, and actually look at it there. Clients that support the App Media query, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, and I know it's a little daunting or complicated for the semi or non-technical crews that are out there. iOS devices have been called flawless rendering. I'm going to put them up there as almost flawless, maybe one less S. They're pretty awesome. They do a great job. Android equally does a great job in Android versions 2.2 through version 4.2. Android 4.3 and 4.4, we're seeing some spotty issues with adaptive responsive designs, actually where it's not responding and actually giving the desktop version. And more news on that later, I'm sure. That might just be an industry-breaking item. Again, the last call-out that I would impart to everybody is that technology is not static. That, again, email is coded like it's 1999, and we've adapted for delivery in a world that's gone mobile. Your mobile device is the smartest thing. Well, it's got more computing horsepower than the computers that took them into the moon. So your mobile device is pretty smart. We can sometimes we use that as the as the design first methodology. Let's design for mobile first and then work backwards from the desktop. But again, it's kind of a balance. Just don't live in a static world. Just do your tests, look at your target audience, know what their expectations are, and try and deliver to that. My comments on adaptive or responsive design. Right now, what I read just in preparation for this was that responsive design is really responsive to the term of 100% of your device width, whether that be your desktop or your mobile item. And I noticed that several web designers, leaders in the industry, were saying that that's the correct term, that responsive design is 100% width based on whatever viewport is active. And that responsive design is really a breakpoint by breakpoint breakdown, where I've got 3 icons there: desktop, tablet, and mobile. Those are 3 individual breakpoints that you could specify or code for. So don't necessarily get confused by the terms, but know that there's some industry terminology that's perhaps used interchangeably. So my last shout out here, my last guidepost thoughts are, as a designer, I'm going to impart to you that you should design for the experience. Know your customers, what devices they're using, get into their habits and what their minds are, what they expect, how things work for them. Again, from a design perspective, that'll help you achieve connection with your audience. That responsive or adaptive, it can be a really rich experience, and it can broaden your reach into your audience, again, when applied correctly and you overcome some of those subtle nuances. As Daniel pointed out at the top of the conversation, is that there are, if it doesn't look good, they're likely to delete it. If it looks mediocre, they might attribute that mediocrity to your brand. So again, make it look great. It's a rich opportunity for you to grab a hold of. That you should have a hierarchy of content, and that leads to the next thought, which is lead throughout the design, where you guide to the clicks, use email as an introduction to a conversation that you can carry out in a better forum. The buy now, the learn more, the hey, check this out, take them over to the shopping cart where you can incent them with other purchase options or get them engaged in some other level. And that unique designs may require more attention or development as technology changes or even as your content changes. And the last thought that I have is that stay focused, be rich with great content, creative, relevant, and keep looking good. That's really the bottom line for me as a designer, providing great support to clients like Daniel across the world. So with all of that, I'm going to add one anecdote here, is that this is really the start. So after this, there are several other components that you might think about, which, you've got this fully tested, you've got some success with your template, you're going to dive into dynamic content next, or relational content, or personalization. You might start thinking about A/B split testing. How do you raise the relevance of your campaigns, gain clicks, online sales, whatever your goals might be. So that would be the next step after this. Again, thank you for your time. I sincerely appreciate it and look forward to talking with you in the Q&A session. Daniel, back to you.
Thanks, John. Just real quick, I just want to talk about some of our results that we've seen thus far. Without a doubt, responsive design has had a big impact on our mobile clicks. So since November, we've seen our mobile click-to-open rate more than basically almost double, from 14.5% up to 28%. So that's a giant leap for us. So it was, it's well worth the investment. It takes a little longer to put together, but in the long term, it's going to, pay big dividends for you. And besides the stats, again, I talked about before, but it's really extremely valuable for the brand. So we strive to give our reader the best user experience they can on our site, and we do the same with everything we do in terms of from every marketing channel that includes email, because we know that does matter and it does impact what they feel like in that experience. So with that, I want to say thanks again to the Blue Hornet team for all the guidance through the process. It was very helpful as we were figuring out what this design would look like to get their feedback and make sure that we're optimizing everything we could. So thanks for that and coding up a really spectacular email. And for now, we'll just shoot it back to Ashley.
Thank you, Daniel. So now we are going to the Q&A section of the presentation. We have a lot of questions that came in, very tactical questions, so these are going to be mostly for you, John.
Awesome.
The first one, I've seen some great responsive design templates, though have trouble handing them off to be updated by my clients because of the complexity of the code.
Yeah. Great question, or really a statement, and I'm going to reiterate, you're right. Doing design, actually coding for responsive design is multiple layers of code, and in some cases, editors are not created equal, and of course we have our own personal experience with HTML and CSS and images and variations in our own practices and design habits. So yes, we have great design templates and certainly have trouble handing them off. There are certain ways, perhaps even coding comments into the responsive is helpful. If they're trying to use a design view and not looking at the code, that becomes a little bit trickier to actually guide the client into how to be successful with their template. Certainly in the Blue Hornet platform, we have a content uploader tool, which might be a valuable option where the client gets to work within a format that's very familiar to them in an Excel spreadsheet. It could be coded as an XML document, but primarily we've used them as Excel documents. And then you put some Smarty logic within the responsive template, and provided the template's the same or near the same time over time, the content and the template get married together through the system, and you end up with a campaign that looks good, looks successful, is pretty usable, and it's relatively friendly for the non-designer to edit the content of that. Beyond that, aside from giving the seminar, I try to be a little more conversational, a little more thoughtful, so having to coach somebody sometimes requires a little bit of patience and thoughtfulness on how this works, and may actually encounter a few times that you've broken it. What I have encountered in breaking things is actually that, I can code this better now because I've seen it break and I've seen what somebody has done, so we can actually code this a little bit different way that perhaps won't give us the same breakage as we had last time. I know that's not necessarily a definitive, like, do this 1, 2, 3, but those are some thoughts that I would offer around providing a template that your client's going to use.
Cool, thank you. Let's see, next question is from Joanne. She says, won't any additional image variations also be loaded with the email, then making the user download images that they don't even see?
True. Yes, you're right. You're correct. So the note on that is that we're kind of in the midst of doing some validation on downloads. What I don't see, and I consume a lot of email, I don't know if that's good or bad, please don't judge me, but consuming a lot of email and noting where images change and don't change, I do recognize, hey, look, this is a huge email that has 2 or 3 layers of 2 layers of images at least in it. And again, with every breakpoint, we could be actually coding another layer in there. So subnote to the subnote, perhaps we only need 2 breakpoints. We don't need to do 2 or 3. So yes, you're right. All the images do get downloaded. If they're a background image and hidden behind a foreground image, it does still get downloaded on the desktop. And in the mobile version, even though it's hidden, you're correct, it does not get downloaded, or it does get downloaded. But what we have not seen is an issue where, now barring the great and glorious email that has huge, ginormous images in it. We have not seen a degradation either in download speed or time. Perhaps, those of us living in urban areas where, the 4G networks are fast and speedy and we've got constant service, rural areas might experience some other latent issue that's on there. But again, I would imagine that it would just be a blip where that smaller image, which would be much smaller than the desktop image, is there for a blipping and then gone. And then in the mobile version, it probably is hidden completely, not even showing, and it just displays the mobile version.
No, actually going back to the very first question about transitioning from the responsive design templates to the actual client, Daniel, I kind of want to get your take on that as well. What has your experience been working in the template from a day-to-day perspective?
It hasn't been too bad. We continue to always test to make sure that it's working correctly, which is a very important point as well, is that we'll find little bugs here and there just because the fact that, the content that we put in these emails will change from time to time. And, like some of our headlines maybe will get a little longer and then we realize, the breakpoint doesn't work as well right here. So we are able to get through the code pretty easily because most of the responsive stuff is up in the CSS piece. And so it's not too difficult once you start to look at it and get explained like, okay, this does this does that. So and give it a couple weeks and then it's pretty easy.
Cool. All right. We have another question for John from Daniel in the audience. Do you use pixel or percentage for setting CSS line height?
I don't know. I'm old school. I do go with pixels, and I just have had better success with that. Again, perhaps it's just the combination of TDs and not using P tags. Again, that's another best practice I'll throw out there is not to use P tags within the content. If you're looking to provide a break between paragraphs, it would be a BR, 2 BRs. But I would set the font size and line height appropriately and not use P tags, and I do use pixels. In my code base, I do have a CSS reset at the head of that, and lately I have seen more traction in Hotmail, Yahoo, and Gmail, which has offered less support for additional CSS in the head of the document. For instance, I had an issue where there was an extra 5 pixels below something pretty consistently through the template, and I was kind of frustrated by it, and I was like, well, what the heck is the problem? What am I doing wrong? And as I just went down the line through my code, I realized that in my CSS reset, my font size was 100% and my line height was 145%. And that 45% actually I noticed it was adding in my webmail clients that extra 5 pixels, and actually in a version of Outlook as well. So I was able to set that to 100% and things worked great. So I was able to capture back that space and mitigate that rendering issue. So pixels over percentages, I tend to think that they're a little more definable, a little more manageable. I'm not quite sure how that would percentage translate to a mobile device. That might require some testing, validation, and investigation on your part, looking at your template.
Let's see. Next question is from Jenny. What is your experience with high pixel density on mobile devices like the Galaxy S4? In our experience, we have found that media queries aren't being rendered how intended. Any advice?
So high density devices. So I do have a Galaxy S4 sitting in our little test lab, and I have my iOS iPhone 5S. So both of those I think would be considered high-density devices where this screen actually can display what's considered a bigger resolution. Now again, I'll minus the iPhone right away because it's got flawless rendering. It really works great. But in the Galaxy S4, what we have noted is that in my note early on was in the version under support for media queries. If it's version 4.3 or even 4.4, and there's some debate on where 4.4 comes out and how it might be pushed out, or some notes that I won't speak to, but version 4.3, at least right now on Galaxy S4, we're seeing where the app media query is not supported. It's actually displaying the desktop version right away. So I don't know necessarily that has high pixel density a relationship to that phone, other than what I do know is that it's usually the app on the device that provides the app media support. So if those apps get updated, which is what our current findings or thoughts are, if your app gets updated and it doesn't support the app media query, it really doesn't matter what device it's on, it's going to be broken, or it's going to display the desktop version. I don't mean to say it'll be broken. It will degrade nicely and show the desktop version. How about that?
All right.
But I will, Jenny, I'll definitely take that question, and we'll run it through the rest of the creative staff here, and we're testing for that now. So
Cool. Let's see. Next question is from Adam. He asks, I have noticed that when the email goes through an Exchange server, it loses its responsiveness. Is there anything that can be done to make it more consistent?
No. And again, I'm not quite sure that it's the Exchange server. Maybe we can find out a little bit more information, Adam, if you wanted to get that back into us about the client that's used, if you're doing it on your iPhone, or if you're Exchange to your iPhone, or if it's on your desktop. But definitely on the Outlook end of things, Exchange usually ties to Outlook. It doesn't support any responsiveness at all. It's going to ignore all the CSS in the head. And I won't go into the nuts and bolts ugly discussion around that.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Martha. Do SVG's images work in emails?
I would say spottily. They're going to work on web platforms, but they're not going to work in Outlook, or I don't know that I've tested that on a mobile device, but with a pretty quick test, I could probably find out.
Okay,
so
we'll find out for you.
All right.
A question from Michelle. What is your experience in emails that are extremely lengthy? We often create emails that could be 3,000 pixels or longer. Should we have buttons at the top, middle, and bottom? From tests, we found that users usually don't scroll back up.
Yeah, so usability question in part here. So you're correct, users don't scroll back up. So thus the invention of the footer on a website, or a footer in an email. So it's a great, my design thoughts, my user experience thoughts are is that as the user transverses, goes all the way down to the bottom, you want to give them some action that they can perform, whether that be one action or links to the site, or heaven forbid that we would provide them an unsubscribe, but some type of action at the bottom of this message. I don't know that I would recommend that you do a 3,000 pixel long email. I understand there's a lot of content, but that might be better facilitated in a place where you could hold a conversation or provide more information around that, and that might be taking a snippet of that and then shooting that over to a website. So a 3,000 long pixel email might have other rendering issues as we start talking about Outlook, for instance. If it were just straight text, at some point it's going to, Outlook in particular has some rendering issues. I couldn't imagine reading 3,000 pixels on a desktop, doubling that when it shrinks down to a mobile device. That might just end up looking like a book. So I think I would try to, again, shorten that, truncate it in some way so that it stays pithy, short, enticing, engaging. It's bold, it's new, it's exciting, and I want to click the button, and then I go off to the website and read about it.
Cool. We're getting a lot of questions about the presentation if we'll be sending it out, and yes, we will be early next week. We're also getting questions. People want to see the code base. We have a responsive design toolkit, actually, that has real working code in it. So you can take the code and work with it, play with it, and we'll include that in the email as well. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. And then we have one final question from CJ. Do you recommend any CSS frameworks to manage media queries for faster email development, similar to Bootstrap for website development?
I could say, I'm familiar with Bootstrap. I could say no would be that's my gut reaction is no. Just because email has so many ugly nuances to it, and I don't want to make it sound negative in any way. If this were a web-savvy / mobile-friendly, even tablet-friendly, very focused set of emails, maybe there would be some play in there, but I don't know that I would employ a framework and try to get technically, linking. You can't do a media query and link out to, for those of you in the audience that may or may not understand all the nuances here, we can't import a CSS. It has to be in the head of the document. Because it only supports the local call to CSS. That's what makes it work. So doing a framework where indeed we make a call out and actually import CSS, that might actually not work. So again, that might be a good point that I can take back to our creative team, and we can actually run some tests and see how that might work or might play out. It's a great question. So.
Yeah, cool. I'll even follow up on that one. And then we have one more question sneak in here. I think it's a great one, so I wanted to ask John. Brian asks, I am new to responsive design, and I'm wondering if there's any extra resources that we could give to him, or anything that you know of that you use or you recommend to newbies.
Yeah, no, totally. Great question. And thanks for a great closing question, Brian. So. Our responsive white paper is a great place to start. It's definitely not for if you're a designer who knows a little code. It's a fair place to start. If you're a developer that knows code very well, it's a great place to get your feet wet and probably a bigger appetite for something more. So in either case, the responsive white paper is valid. And again, it's relevant to the conversation or topic of email. Beyond that, I'll point you out to Campaign Monitor and Email on Acid. And both of them have huge resources on their blogs, following / their communities around supporting email and responsive design are very thorough and very supportive, and we're pretty active in supporting, helping, using, all that kind of stuff in both of those cases. So I would suggest campaignmonitor.com as well as emailonacid.com, and you can put a /blog after each of those. You can search on responsive in Google and probably land in one of those two places. So there you go.
Cool. I'm lucky enough to have John right over the wall for me, so he's my resource. With that, we're going to go ahead and end today's webinar. I want to thank Daniel from Take Part for joining us, and I want to thank you, John, for joining us today. And everybody out there, all of our attendees, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.